Chapter 7, Decontamination, Point of Use Treatment and Transport. This chapter is about literally how to do decontamination from the start when it arrives. The learning objective is to understand the importance of soiled items, treatment, and transport, identify the source of contaminated items, explain the importance of point of use treatment, review basic procedures to transport soiled items from user areas to the sterile processing decontamination area, identify basic sources for education and training information applicable to the transport of contaminated items. Basically, the rundown of this chapter is to basically understand that not everything comes from the OR. Sometimes we get items obviously from labor and delivery. You guys all know. We get items from radiology, burn unit. We get items from respiratory. Just anything that goes into the mouth. We have to disinfect, sterilize, and so on. So we get a bunch of items, not just from the OR. So understanding how it gets transported from another floor to our department. And SPD, as you guys all know, it can be located in the basement, located on the second floor. At my hospital, we're located on the second floor. Torrance Memorial, they're located in the basement. Kaiser, they're located on the first floor. It all really depends on the foundation of where the hospital places their SPD department. Good and bad, Torrance Memorial, their decontamination isn't elevator worthy. So you have to literally go to the OR, pick up the items, bring it back down to SPD. That usually is called a runner. So they're the ones that basically answer the phones, go back and forth with the OR, drop and deliver items, pick up the soiled items, and so on. And then the decon workers usually just stay in decon. So it's kind of cool. So, like for instance, for 8 hours, you might just be doing that. You might not be washing instruments. You might not be setting up. You're just going to be running back and forth. So you get your cool little steps in, get your little workout in, and so on. Makes it a lot easier for a lot of people who like doing that. But to be honest, I like washing instruments, so I'd rather stay washing. So yeah, so introduction. Doing a little something different here. My throat's really, really hurting at the moment. My voice is going in and out. So I'm going to pre-record myself just so you guys don't have to worry about me stopping and going so much like yesterday. So introduction, reusable items and other medical devices proceed in the sterile processing department, the SPD, are transported to patient care and treatment areas where they are used in a wide variety of procedures and applications. After use, they must be transported back to decon area to be processed for reuse. Sometimes the transport distance is only a few feet, but other items may be transported a great distance between facilities. Like I said, burn unit might be located on the 6th floor, and you have to travel from the 6th floor all the way down to your SPD department and so forth. Whether the distance is only a few feet between facilities, consistent handling of soiled items is a must. This chapter reviews recommended protocols and requirements for other transport activities. I'm going to be currently watching. I'm literally going to show you guys how easy it is to understand this stuff, because now we're getting to the nitty-gritty of what we actually do in an 8-hour shift. Understanding the book's going to be very, very easy. It's just, like I said, repetitive motion. You're going to be doing this every single day. Hearing these type of terms and whatnot, it'll come second nature as soon as you guys get into the field. The importance of point of use treatment and transport. Cell processing SP should be aware of the goals of point of use treatment and transport. These include remove of gross soiled items on an instrument. Gross soil left on instruments not only makes them more difficult to clean, but can damage the instrument. So we expect, does it happen often? No, it does not. Every now and then it falls through the cracks. We expect the surgical techs, the nurses upstairs, the OR and so forth to pre-clean these items, wipe them down, spray it with an enzymatic pre-soiled spray to prevent bioburden basically hardening onto our instruments. Does it happen? Every now and then they'll miss. Every now and then they'll forget to do it. It might be a new employee, it might be a traveling nurse, surgical tech, and so on. So they might not know the protocols of how the hospital should be. But every hospital should have a pre-soiled enzymatic spray that sprays onto the instruments after surgery, and that basically makes it easier for us as SPD techs to clean those items when it comes into decontamination. Um, Soiled items must be treated in a manner that will prevent damage during transport to the decontamination area. So basically, we want to make sure those items that are coming to us are safely in its bin, that it came from the container, or if it's a wrapped item, you know, like it's protected. They're not loose dangling items. For instance, a good example is it's not going to just be like this. They're going to be placed inside correctly, like this, in its container. So that the moment it sticks out, the possibility of it flying around inside is going to be high. So you want to make sure that when it arrives, it is correctly put back into its situation. Every now and then your manager will ask you like, hey, we're going to audit the OR. And when you audit the ORs, basically catch their flaws. And it's not to get them in trouble, it's just to coach them, because instruments are expensive. One item, for instance, let's just say this is a silver container, a metal container, the instruments go in here. That container may cost $3,000 to $5,000 depending on the size. So we want to make sure for long-term use, these last forever. This is longevity items. These aren't one-time use items. We literally use these every single day. So you want to make sure that they're very well taken care of. Prevention of cross-contamination. Soiled items must be safely transported from point of use to the decon area without cross-contaminating the environment between those areas. That basically means if it's coming down from the OR, if it's a used tray, you don't want to have those instruments in an open container or in an open push cart. You want to make sure that bin is closed, because we don't know what type of contaminants are in it. We don't know if that patient has Ebola or any type of serious pathogen that can be airborne or spread through, especially if, let's just say, that door is open in a push cart. I'll show a picture of a push cart here. That basically means if the door is open, you're exposing the pathogens to basically flying around and so on. And let's just say if an item is super bloody, let's just say this item is an instrument and it's super soiled. It falls, I catch it with my hand, now I touch the elevator, now I just cross-contaminated my whole entire field of work. You know, the elevator, I cross-contaminated the handles where you hold, like, you know, when the elevator is moving down, the handicap handles, and so on. So you want to make sure all of those things are protected, because you're not going to be the one cleaning the elevator. That's housekeeping. So you always want to make sure everyone, you know, we're a big team here in a hospital. We work with everybody, so you want to make sure everybody is safe at all times. And then we got timeliness. The prompt return of soiled or contaminated items to the SPD is essential for cleaning and processing. So what I mean by timeliness is you want to make sure that they arrive on time. So let's just say, and if they don't arrive on time, you make sure that you double check on it. So like, let's say if a surgery ends at 10 a.m. and you're just sitting in decontamination waiting for decontaminated items, and it's 10:05, 10:30, you might want to just go upstairs and check yourself. Sometimes the surgical tech will forget to bring it down, or maybe that's your job to double check and bring it down. You never want to let those instruments sit for too long, because then it gets harder to clean. Keeping others safe. Soiled items must be contained and labeled to help ensure that all individuals who may come in contact with contaminated items remain safe during the transport process. Literally touches back to prevention of cross-contamination. No one's safe if we're all doing the wrong things. So you want to make sure we're doing everything by a standard, by a protocol, just to prevent any type of cross-contamination, because that leads to keeping other people safe. The moment you break that barrier, not everyone's exposed. Gross soil, tissue, body fat, blood, and other body substances. That might be on your chest. Be very mindful on that. Sources of contaminated items. Reusable devices such as instruments and equipment are used in numerous locations throughout the healthcare facility. I'll show a picture here of some types of used items that we use in a hospital that we have to disinfect. Pause. Sources of contaminated items. The surgery department generates a high volume of contaminated items, but other ancillary areas such as labor and delivery, the emergency department, endoscopic, cardiac, cardiac care services, and other procedure-based areas also generate contaminated items. We discussed this before. Earlier, literally like 5 minutes ago, where I basically mentioned the burn unit. Some hospitals have a burn unit. County hospitals usually have a burn unit. Torrance Memorial has a burn unit. My hospital has a burn unit. So we get bandage scissors because we have to cut, or not we, but the nurses have to cut their gauze, replace those gauzes with sterile bandage scissors. So we have to re-sterilize those items as well. So be very mindful on that. Contaminated items may be returned to the SP department during scheduled soil pickup rounds or upon request from a user department. Sometimes soiled items must be delivered to the decon area by the employees of the user department. For example, surgical staff return case carts to the decontaminated area after surgical procedures. Some hospitals. Generally, however, contaminated items are placed in a designated holding area to be picked up by SPD techs, basically our runners. We would be a runner in that type of situation where we would just go pick up our dirty instruments from the OR or wherever it may be. Holding items until returned to sterile processing. All departments that use the storage reusable items for later transport to the sterile processing department need a designated holding area for contaminated items until they can be retrieved. Usually you'll see a biohazard sticker. If you guys ever been to a hospital, you're walking to go visit your relative on the floor, and you walk by a room that says biohazard or soiled items, that's where our instrumentation would live. Biohazard signage, notice, post in easily seen locations that alert people in the area about the presence of harmful bacteria, viruses, or other dangerous biohazard agents or organisms. I'll post a picture of a biohazard right here. Point of use treatment. Instrument decontamination begins at the point of use. When the procedure is complete, instruments should be prepared in a manner that will help ensure that they can be transported safely to the SPD contamination area for complete cleaning. Simple. Reread that again. Instrument decontamination begins at the point of use. When the procedure is complete, instruments should be prepared in a manner that will help to ensure that they will be transported safely to the SPD decontamination area for complete cleaning. To go back, reasons for point of use treatment are pretty standard and copacetic. You'll understand it. Kind of makes sense. Basically, for instance, if you're done eating at your house, the ideal is to wash those so you don't let the item that you just ate sit too long on the spoon, fork, or the plate. Same exact concept with decontamination. Point of use treatment helps prolong instrument life. Common substances to which instruments are exposed during procedures such as blood and saline can break down device protective finish and accelerate decomposition. So for instance, if I'm going to cook a steak with this cast iron pan, if I let that sit too long, guess what? It's going to be a lot harder to remove it. And then if I have to use a bristle brush or I have to use an abrasive brush to clean my item, my instrument, it might take off the coating of that instrument and make it basically weaker and possibility of rust to grow and so forth. Once it starts to rust, there's basically no turning back from that. And rust is also cancerous. If there is a rusty instrument and you sterilize that, majority of the time, those instruments in that whole entire set will all get rusty eventually. Dry and soil debris, especially on instruments with lumens, are hard to reach. You guys all saw that video yesterday where they run a pull through and they cut it with a saw and they notice how dirty and gunky it is in there. Same exact concept. If we let it sit for too long, it's gonna harden. A brush is made out of plastic. To get something that's hard, it's not gonna be easy. If a good example would be getting a Q-tip, putting it into your ear. You're removing all that earwax. But if you ever notice that Q-tip starts to get flimsy, starts to wiggle around, starts to bend and so on in your ear, that just shows you how hard is it to get wax. And so when you go to a doctor and they clean your ears, they'll use it's called a curette. It's a metal instrument and it basically doesn't bend and fold and so on. Soil and excess moisture promote the formation of biofilm colonies. Biofilm is a highly resistant to cleaning and disinfecting chemicals, so removing the causes of biofilm is essential. Biofilm, a collection of microorganisms that attach to surface and each other form a colony. The colony procedures precedes a protective gel that is very difficult to penetrate with detergent and disinfectants. Sorry guys, my throat's hurting really bad. When soil dries, instrument requires more aggressive cleaning methods, and instrument with dried soil also take longer to clean. The proper care of handling of instruments are equipped is the responsibility of everyone who comes in contact with them, and that begins with the personnel at the point of use. The personnel at point of use is the OR primarily. So if they take care of their instruments when it's after surgery, it comes down to us. Basically, it makes our job a lot easier and makes their job a lot easier because no instruments are missing. As a leader, as a management individual, when we used to facilitate with the OR and we'd always get into disagreements, OR would basically saying, we're basically doing your job by pre-cleaning it. No, not technically, because yes, you're making it easier for us to clean, but if you make it harder for us to clean, those instruments are going to go out for repair because they're going to either break and so on. And guess what? You're not going to have those instruments needed for surgery. So when they see it like that, that's when their whole mindset changes. The proper care and handling of instruments and equipment is a responsibility for everyone who comes in contact with them, and that begins with the personnel point of use. I'm going to irradiate on that, how important that is. Once you understand that, it's basically like a good long working vehicle. You know, just do the proper maintenance, the oil change and so on, the brakes, and it won't break down. Same exact concept. Personnel responsible for handling instruments at the point of use must keep in mind that those instruments are precision devices that can have a negative impact on patient care if not managed properly. Instruments should be handled with care throughout the procedure and be prepared properly for transport according to the facility policies. Provide an example of an instrument setup in an OR. I'll show you guys a picture of what an OR looks like. Point of use treatment guidelines. All individuals performing point of use treatment should receive education, training, and competencies completed for the task being performed. Remove gross soils from instruments. Wear appropriate PPE while preparing instruments for transport. So for instance, they just basically wear gloves. They put it in the bin, they close the bin, and move on with their day. Follow the manufacturer's instructions, the IFU. Every item may be different. So, you know, for them, it's all about following the IFU. For us, it's all about following the IFU. So everyone stays in one transition. Everyone is safe at all times. Separate reusable sharps from other instruments. Place instruments with sharp points or edges, such as cutting edges and skin hooks, in a separate container to reduce the risk of injuries from sharps. Not necessarily sharps that are one-time use, but reusable sharp instruments. We have skin hooks. We have certain type of instrumentation. I'll show you images here of sharp instruments that you may not see right away. Usually it's in plastic surgeries. Scissors or anything in the instrumentation world could be sharp. You guys all saw those little forceps that have pointy tips. Those can pierce through a glove real quick. The concept is understanding what is sharp, so you move it to the side so the SPD techs, when they grab it, they don't get poked. That's all it does. Sharps are cutting instruments including knives, scalpels, blades, needles, and scissors of all types. Other examples include chisels, osteotomes, some curettes, dissectors, elevators, rongeurs, and cutting forceps, punches, saws, and saws and trocars. Protect delicate instruments from damage during transport by segregating it into different containers or placing them on top of heavier items. You don't want to put a heavier item on top of a lighter item. Kind of common sense. You'll break the item. You know, it's like, for instance, dropping a hammer on a bag of chips. The bag of chips is going to basically deflate, and all the items in that bag of chips will crumble. Kind of makes sense when you see it like that. Separate reusable linen. Reusable linen should be removed and placed into an appropriate bag or container. Users should take extra caution to ensure that small instruments are not mistakenly included with the linen. Removable disposable components such as blades, disposable tubing, and canisters. Sharp items should be placed in a hard-sided container labeled biohazard. Separating disposable from reusable components reduces the amount of contaminated items that must be transported, and it also reduces the risk of injury from sharps such as knife blades and needles. When separating disposable items, which closely to ensure the reusable items are not removed and discarded with disposable components, metal drape clamps are sometimes left attached to disposable drapes. Our towel clips I'll show an image of a towel clip here. Literally holds on to the drape. A drape is like a curtain that keeps the body sterile. Open hinge instruments disassemble multi-part instruments and place instruments in the appropriate instrument tray in an orderly manner. All that means is anything that can be taken apart, moved back and forth, should be all open. So if I have, let's just say, let me get an example. Simple scissors. I'm not going to put scissors in the washer like this because it's only going to wash this side of the surface and this side of the surface. But guess what? Where it goes into the patient is when it's open. It goes inside these blades. Inside. So you want this fully open, rested in the tray. So it can reach in all contacts. Hope that makes sense. Keep items together. Instrument set of multi-part items should be kept together. So for instance, whatever goes into, let's just say this is my container of instruments. Whatever goes in here must be all kept together. So for instance, all of these items have to be kept in here. You know, you just have to be figure a way where they can just be all open and placed in there. So it goes to the washer. A couple reasons why they want it like this is because it organizes it on the clean side. I'm not looking for the instrument. I don't know where this belongs to, and so on and so on. So if this is called a plastic tray, all my items in here should be only for a plastic set, if that makes any sense. You know, I'm not going to mix hand and foot trays and plastic trays all together. No. I'm going to basically put all my hand and foot instruments in one tray, all my plastic instruments in its plastic tray, and it goes to the washer. So when it comes onto the clean side, and the person that's assembling those items will have easy access, easy maneuvering to get into those instruments. In all, this is all about working smarter, not harder. When there are big cases that require multiple instrument sets, keeping instruments together in the same set can be a challenge. Why is it important? Consider that in a busy decontamination department that processes 50 or 60 surgical procedures a day, there can be hundreds of trays processed. If instrumentation from one case is scattered between 4 different trays in the OR, it can be several hours before each tray is clean and makes its way to the assembly area side of the SPD. On the assembly side, which I just basically went over, it takes time to set those trays up. So if all the instruments are scattered, guess what? It's going to take a lot harder to set that tray up. And remember, the average 8-hour tech in a busy hospital should average about 35 trays in an 8-hour shift. If you think about it, 8 to 12 minutes per tray, that should be easily accountable. Unless the phone rings and you're doing other things of that nature. But in general, if you're setting up instrumentation, we try just to have you only on instrumentation. We'll have a designated phone answerer so no one gets distracted. We have a designated wrapper so that individual's wrapping specifically. So no one's doing multi things at once because it prevents distractions and it prevents mistakes from happening. Notify the SPD about items needed repair. If instruments or equipment require repair, they should be identified or tagged. We went over this yesterday. If an item is broken, put a repair tag on it so it doesn't get used again and possibly impact the patient's life. Notify the SPD about the requiring turnaround for another case. Do not automatically assume the department has that information. So that's usually the OR. So turnaround, the term is used to describe instruments or equipment that must be received priority processing in order to be made available for another procedure. So let's just say, back to this, if I only have one plastic tray and I have 3 plastic surgeries, after that first plastic tray is used, guess what? I'm going to have to reprocess this as #1 priority. If I have 50 items to wash, I'm going to wash the most important one first. So after it comes out the washer, the person setting up can redo those right away. Usually we get a head notice when there's a turnaround. The OR will call like, hey, this is Nurse Chris. We have 3 plastic surgeries. We only have 1 plastic surgery tray available. Can you please turn that around ASAP so we can use it for the second case? transport of soiled items. Contaminated items should be containerized before transport through the facility to minimize airborne or contact spread of microorganisms and reduce the risk of cross-contamination and infection. Literally what I said earlier to you guys in regards to if it's coming in a container, you want to make sure that container has a closed door so the instrument's bioburden doesn't come seeping out. The goal of all soil transport is to transfer the contaminated items in the sterile processing decontamination area while minimizing the risk of cross-contamination. That's all we're basically trying to do there. All transport devices must be free from external gross contamination such as blood before transport to reduce the risk of environmental contamination and personal exposure. Contaminated items should be handled as little as possible to reduce the risk of exposure to employees and patients. Place instrument sets securely in the cart. If you guys look on page 102, figure 7.10, this is what it's not supposed to look like. Everything is scattered, everything is incorrectly placed in there. The possibility of it falling over, more than likely going to happen. Imagine leaving an elevator, there's a crack in between the elevator onto the floor you're going onto. So, personal transporting contaminated items should be educated. So, obviously, you guys are students, but when you guys get into your internship, they're going to train you. I'm not going to say they're going to train you 100%, but they're going to train you enough to survive in that hospital. And that's the whole point of this class, is to basically train you for the hospital so you get a gist of what you're getting into. When transporting instruments, contaminated items should remain physically separated from their clean and sterile counterparts. Containers and carts used for transporting contaminated items should be not used to transport or deliver clean items. So let's just say me and Joseph are the runners, and then if he's delivering items to the OR that are sterile, we're not going to use the same dirty cart. We're not going to use the same silver cart to transport dirty items. We're going to use two different carts. We're not going to use the same elevator as well. We're going to have a dirty elevator and we're going to have a clean elevator. So Joseph's job is to deliver the clean, sterile items, and my job is to pick up the dirty, unsterile items. We're going to be using two different carts, two different elevators, and basically keep them all separate at all times. Safety guidelines for soiled item transport. All instrument, utensils, and equipment used in patient care and treatment processes should be considered contaminated. Like I said, treat everything like it's dirty. Treat everything like it has every type of disease, virus, and so on. So you are always protected at all times. You never want to get too comfortable. I see individuals sometimes get a little too comfortable. They get a little too relaxed, and then boom, they get poked. And guess what? Even if you know that item wasn't used, the counterparts could be used, or the surface that you're cleaning on wasn't cleaned by the prior tech before they left, and then you may have gotten that cross-contamination of a bloodborne pathogen or a virus and so on. So you always want to make sure your PPE, you always want to make sure you're protected to prevent that from happening. Safety guidelines for soiled instruments. After loading the cart, PPE should be removed and hands should be washed. Remember, wash your hands at all times, guys. Transporting equipment and case carts through corridors can pose significant safety concerns. SP techs must always maintain control of transport carts and should not move them at excessive speeds. Patient, visitors, healthcare providers, and movable equipment share the same hallways as transport cars, and excessive speed or inattention could lead to accidents. And that is the truth. Something that simple can be a lot difficult for a lot of people, and I'm one to be blamed on for that as well. Because let's just say I'm working a 12-hour shift. I'm working 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. Let's just say I'm covering because morning shift had called out. By 11, 12 o'clock, I'm fatigued. I'm tired. I'm not gonna lie. So I might get lazy with the push cart, the sterile cart, and then always have corners. So if one person's pushing a bed with a patient and I'm coming from the other corner, we might clash. So you always want to make sure when you're pushing it, you're seeing what's in front of you at all times, not looking down, not on your cell phone, A lot of my students from my last class all got in trouble for cell phone usage because a lot of them were young. They're like within the 19 to 23, 24 age. I got a lot of calls from my manager or from the manager of the hospital stating that your student was on their phone XYZ amount of times, um, ran into a housekeeper mopping the floor, and so forth. Because imagine those instruments in there. You guys all felt that instrument tray. We had a heavy and a light tray. One tray was 25 pounds. Imagine multiple trays of that in that cart. And you have to push it. And it's a slope. Let's just say it's not a straight hallway. It's going down. You push that, it's taking you. I don't care how strong you are. It's just the physics of law, like the laws of physics where if something heavy is getting pushed down a hill, it's gonna go fast regardless. So you have to make sure you're always ahead of the game on that end. You always want to do a push-pull, never a pull-push. That's on your test as well. You always want to push, and then if you have two carts, you push first, and then the momentum will help you guide the back cart that you're pushing. The moment you pull first, you have bad work ergonomics. You can dislocate your shoulder. I've been an individual from that. I dislocated my left shoulder, and it still stays dislocated to this day because I thought I was Mr. Strong Guy, and I thought I could move things XYZ amount. And then sure enough, I pulled rather than push, and it ended up dislocating my shoulder. So be very mindful of that. And that was years ago, and to this day, it still pops out every now and then. It's just understanding that concept. Prior to transporting, SP techs should be aware of ergonomic principles. Completing tasks that require lifting, bending, twisting, pushing, and pulling incorrectly can cause injury. Applying ergonomic principles can help technicians avoid workplace injuries such as musculoskeletal disorders that cause back pain, tendonitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, and even bone fractures. Off-site processing. Sometimes contaminated items may need to be transported between buildings or to a central office site processing center. When it is necessary to transport contaminated items using a truck or van, personnel must consult the U.S. Department of Transportation, the DOT. We learned about that yesterday, guys. Guidelines and follow applicable state and local requirements for safe transport of biohazard materials. Be very mindful on that. All of those little agencies, you guys have to know. It's going to be on your test. So just remember DOT, Department of anything that has to move transporting. EPA, environmental protection. Guess what? That protects the ozone. That protects the environment. So when you start to understand that, understand the agencies should be a lot easier for you guys. Education and training. When performed improperly, the transport of contaminated items may pose a threat to the safety of patients, visitors, and employees. Carefully thought out procedures must be developed to help ensure that all contaminated items are appropriately handled. The development of these procedures should be done with the input of the support of the facility's infection prevention and hazardous materials committees. Recommended practices for contaminated items transport are provided by the Association for Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, AAMI, the AAMI standards. Procedures should also reflect Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, so those two work quote-unquote together. Additional information regarding sold instruments and transport can be obtained from the Association for the Perioperative Registered Nurses, the AORN. In conclusion, instruments, point of use treatment, and proper transport to the SPD requires interdepartmental teamwork. Good communication and training can help personnel in all departments protect their facilities, instruments, and better serve patients. By understanding and following the recommendation guidelines, the IFU, for the patient's use of for the point of use treatment and transport of contaminated items, SP techs should help patients and visitors and healthcare workers. Remember, the resources, ANSI and AAMI, ST79 2017. That's when it was basically updated. and the 2020 amendments. A1, A2, A3, A4. But just remember, ANSI AAMI ST9 ST79 2017. So the main terms you guys should basically look at is gross soiled, biohazards, signage, biofilm, sharps, turnover, turnaround, and musculoskeletal disorders. Those are the key terms that you're going to have to know. And also, I'm going to keep reminding people that because people, you're going to see this on your test. ANSI AAMI ST79 2017. Cool. Perfect. I hope no one else gets sick like me because I feel like crap. I hope this video helped. I like doing this every now and then just so you guys can always reflect back and watch this if you're driving and so on and so on. So cool.